Hi, I'm David Kinnaman, president of Barna Group. We've joined World Vision UK on a new study called the UK Church in Action, and we're presenting some of those findings for you here today, along with this monograph that goes through all the findings of the report. In this session, we want to talk about the perceptions of the UK church among the general population. What do people in our culture think of the church? And I'd like to talk with you about the problem of indifference. We find in our research that most people in our culture actually believe, as you can see here, that there is a role for the church. 59% say that there is a value in the church today, and yet 4 out of 10 UK adults say they don't know which needs the church should meet, or they don't have any real desire to see the church actively engaged in our communities. And so this growing tide of indifference is one of the key storylines that this research tells us. In this next slide, we actually look at a stained glass window of different perceptions, an infographic of the positive and negative perceptions that UK adults in general have of the church. What's interesting is that, as you can see here at the base, that 13% say none of these perceptions exist. We actually gave them a tick list, and 13% couldn't pick any of the positive or negative perceptions. Or don't know, 16%. So a huge proportion of UK adults really don't have any perception. And when we compare that to other research that Barna Group has done, we would say that here in the UK, there is an increasing number of people who really have no idea what the church does, this rising tide of indifference. And that's a big challenge for us as church leaders, is most people just don't care. You can see some of the positive and negative perceptions here on the slide, as well as in the report. Now, let me break that down for you a little bit, because as you can imagine, practicing Christians have more positive perceptions of the church than do non-Christians, and you can see that finding is illustrated here. Very few non-Christians have some of the positive perceptions of the church. But what's interesting is here's one slide of some of the perceptions, including good for the community, focused on the needs of the community, etc. Here's another slide of positive perceptions. And one of the interesting sort of overall trends is that even among Christians, there is a small proportion of them who have exceedingly high positive perceptions of the church. And I think this is a real challenge for you as church leaders. You can see that one of the only things that is striking about the perceptions of practicing Christians is the fact that they believe, about 4 in 10 do, that the church is good for their community. Now, we think there is a lot of work to do to help these Christians understand the role of the church and to increase their confidence in the role and positive impact that the church has. When we looked at some of the negative perceptions, you can see some of these things here: an exclusive club, internally focused, not compatible with science. One of the perceptions that's really common among non-Christians. Judgmental, hypocritical, a couple of other areas that non-Christians especially are critical of the church about. And as well as you can imagine, these are pretty high perceptions, except look, it's fewer than half of UK non-Christians who hold those negative perceptions. In the US, where we do quite a bit of research, there's actually a much higher percentage of non-Christians who hold exceedingly negative perceptions of the church. This, to me, is just another example of the increasing indifference that the UK general population has towards the church. They don't have particularly positive impressions, and they also don't have particularly negative perceptions. They're almost as though it's fading to the background. So let me ask you to evaluate your work and these findings in light of a few questions. The first is, what steps could we take to help Christians articulate the why behind their efforts? Why do they care? We find in this study all of this evidence that they're actually out there doing good work, but how could we help them become even more confident in articulating why they care, as well as how can we help them become more confident that God is working through them? There's so much evidence from other research and this research of the good that the church is doing here in the UK and around the world. So let's help tell those stories to help Christians better understand and become more confident in what God is doing. We can't really change the perceptions of non-Christians, but we can help those in our communities become more clear about the good that their work is doing. And finally, one of the key things we find in this research and so many other studies that we have done in Scotland, in Ireland, in the US, and around the world is that prayer is an important way that people grow in their confidence of what God is doing. And so we ask you to take a look at this particular question. In what ways can you pray missionally and in fact make prayer a mission? Could we join God and open our hearts to what He is doing in the world through prayer? We find this is an important indicator of some of the most successful and effective churches, is that they pray missionally for being in a post-Christian culture. And so we invite you to evaluate and take action on that particular item. Join us for this next session as we talk more about the differences between social justice and mission in the church. And again, it's our pleasure to join World Vision UK as we look at this research to help us become more effective as leaders and as churches here in our communities.